Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium podcast. My name is Craig, your host, and with me today is another person who is here to make me feel really bad about my lack of success in life. I'm just kidding. It's Leopoldo Gout. How are you doing, Leopoldo?
I'm fantastic. It's sunny in New York City, and I'm ready for you, and I love your podcast, so I'm excited to talk with you and all your wonderful listeners.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'm kidding about what I said, but only kind of. This actually reminds me a little bit of an interview I did with S.L. Wong a few weeks ago, and people may remember that. And she came on and told her story of how she came to do what she did and all of the accomplishments that she'd had. And I just kind of sat there and went, oh my gosh, well, what am I doing with my life? And when I look up Leopoldo's website, your bio, your story a little bit, it's a little bit of the same thing. You are not only an author, but you're also a film producer and director. You're an artist. You do all the things. And I don't know quite where to start with you, but let's start here. Your latest project coming out is a novel called Piñata. There it is. Dun, dun.
Look, dun, dun, dun.
And it is, well, this is appropriate because it's a horror book, right? It's, I have not dipped into it yet, but I've read the synopsis and I've read some of the reviews, and it seems properly terrifying. But tell us a little bit about Piñata. What is the book?
The book is kind of like my exploration into kind of the demons and the horrors and the kind of power of post-colonialism from Mexico, and using that energy. So it has two thread lines. On the one hand is, I grew up in Mexico City, not a lot of money, but a lot of culture. So my mom was a political activist, and she would take us to rallies for rights of women and indigenous people and languages and children. So I grew up in a house that was full of books and art, and huge writers and filmmakers and artists would visit our small apartment, and it made me feel that I was part of this bigger world. So Piñata has a little bit of that energy of, going into Mexico City and looking at the Zócalo, which is the center core of Mexico City. Underneath, there's a whole pyramid complex called Templo Mayor, where, the Spaniard conquistadors, they pull down the pyramids and build on top of the pyramids their churches, and through a lot of violence, both physical and spiritual and mental, they converted a nation into a different religion and kind of murder the old gods to bring them their god. And then on the other hand, I had, without getting any political, I'm raising a kid, and she, when she was just turning into a teenager a couple of years ago, that kind of was my shoe drop, because she was very enraged with certain things in this world, and I felt her anger and her rage. And I grew up with a very powerful mom and two sisters and my brother, but the women in my family and the women that would come to my mother were amazing and powerful. In my Instagram, there's a few photographs of my mom's house, and people, if they're curious to see what I'm talking about, my mom passed away, but there's some pictures of her that it's extraordinary, and you can see her presence and her witchy powers. And I drew from these two kind of layers. So the book, starts in during the conquest, and it's kind of like a horrific moment, because I call them my wormholes of research. I had this incredible connection to a lot of art from the, pre-colonialism and then post-colonialism. And I discovered this painting that was depicting, Catholic monks indoctrinating kids by Nahuatl kids, indigenous kids, forcing them to break a piñata and eat the inside. And that was like really horrific. That's something that Mexicans, we all do with lots of fun and games during our birthdays. And during a few other festivities, we break a piñata. The origins was really sinister. So that twist, when I saw that image, I was like, oh my God, how come Guillermo del Toro didn't see this before? I'm so lucky. So I started to write like a crazy person. And so the story starts there, and then it turns into, in a contemporary world, I used a little bit echoes of my mom and myself, because I left Mexico, and I've always, even from my first novel, which is called Ghost Radio, that is also a horror uh, novel that it's getting a little bit of a renaissance online because Pedro Pascal, the actor of Last of Us, did a beautiful audiobook of that book. So people are rediscovering my first novel. But I touched on these images and elements of pre-Hispanic culture. So when in my book there's this single woman, kind of like echoing my mom, even though my mom stayed in Mexico, that takes on a summer her children to Mexico because she's an architect and she gets this job of redesigning an old hacienda slash monastery into a boutique hotel, which is happening in Mexico a lot. And during that, they find a very old clay pot that kind of a piñata, and that unleashes some sort of like possession energy to them. So that's the story. That's the bulk of the story. But I wanted to preface that it's, even though it has very visceral, horrific moments, and I use the genre, it's really rooted in my years of research that started in my first novel, that started in a lot of the films and TV shows that I'm doing, and that research has carried up into Piñata, and the trigger was my daughter Rage. So it was a combination of two very different things, because when you're an immigrant to this country, there's things that you leave behind that I miss about Mexico in terms of how I'm raising my children, because my wife is American and she loves New York. She's a staunch New Yorker, and I don't think we're going anywhere. But I still feel that, I try to bring them to Mexico as much as I can, but it's not the same. I grew up in, my mom had a place right across the street from Pyramid. So I really grew up with those things, that history very present in my childhood, and those symbols and sculptures and pieces of history of Mexico were all there, like a labyrinth for me to find it. And I feel that when you're a little kid and they take you underneath Mexico City to see the temples and you see the art, it's really like vivid history that you kind of touch and feel and smell. So that's kind of like where it is.
Yeah. When it comes to horror as a genre, it's similar to science fiction in a way, in that there's a there's a superstructure. There's the bones of the story may be, the horror elements, the spirits unleashed, as you say, in this clay pot that smashes. It sounds like, so there's the bones of the story that are horror, the stuff that's going to scare you, but kind of like science fiction, you can take that and then put the meat on those bones of a story that means something, that's trying to say something about ourselves or our society or something. In your case, it sounds like memory is a big. There's something about memory that seems to animate you in some of the synopses and stuff that I've read in prep for this episode. Is that fair? And
yeah.
Is it, do you lean more on personal memory? As you say, I loved growing up in Mexico and I miss some things about it, and I'll always carry that with me. Is it more cultural? Here's this stuff from pre-colonial times that we're forgetting about, the gods that were, for lack of a better term, killed off by the conquistadors or whoever. And I want to retain that memory. How does memory play into it for you? And is it more personal or cultural, or both?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love your questions already. So it's both for sure. It's and to give you back a little bit of a bigger viewpoint of my process is, people think that I do a lot of different things, but it's not really. A lot of the work that I do has very similar echoes. They're all layers of my memory, and I love that my process as a creative person, I use it like a vulture. I have this is going to make you laugh, but I do have a process where I'm very connected with scent. So I have my own meditational kind of process, even in my art, in my visual art. When I make paintings and sculptures, I use deep dives into memory, and I go very atomical in my memory. For example, I spent weeks just trying to remember the smell of my grandmother's door in her house from my father's side, to just go atomically of saying it, because I remember running to the door that was rusty and had this broken black paint. So there was little holes from the rust, and I would try to see who would come and open the door. And after a week of really going through that image and those scents, I started to remember, oh, what was in the left side, what was in the right side. And that memory is very atomical and very personal. But at the same time, I think it echoes through, all of the other research that I do in terms of the historical past of Mexico, the membrane that is still in the present, the fact that a lot of words that we use in America and in Mexico come from the Aztec, the Nahuatl language, like avocado and jitomate, tomatoes. These are words that didn't exist in Europe or in Asia. They're 100% Nahuatl. So there's a connection with all of us. The guacamole in the Super Bowl all over America. They're literally repeating a Nahuatl word, which I love it, because it's kind of like a national kind of treasure these days. And there's not enough avocados Mexicans do to satisfy America. So I love the macro and micro play with our with the way I deal with any creative things in as I said, sometimes I do that in a book, in the case of piñata, and sometimes I do it in a painting, and I start with those layers, and I start with those kind of wormholes of history, and sometimes are personal, sometimes are universal. But in terms of piñata, I really wanted to pull the idea that what happens when a language and old gods get forgotten, and are they angry that people are forgetting? What will they do? Kind of the feeling that there is this energy that they left impregnated into the land, into our country, and in Mexico, literally, if you go downtown, there's some places where the pavement of the roads in the Zócalo, which is right in the center of the city, where the church and the government are in Mexico City, the faces of some Aztec sculptures kind of break from the pavement, and they're kind of coming up. So that image has been haunting me forever, since I'm like 4. And I used to go a lot to those places with my mom, and I remember that feeling of like the pavement and of modernity being broken by an ancient world that is trying to escape the prison that it has of being forgotten, and that is a kind of a pulsating energy that I wanted to play with the characters and the storyline in the Piñata book.
It's I remember this will sound like a tangent, but I'll bring it back. I remember in the late 90s there was a 2-part miniseries with Sam Neill called Merlin, and he plays Merlin the Wizard, and at the end of it he has to defeat the evil kind of fairy goddess woman.
I remember that.
Malevolent. You remember this? And in the end, the way that they defeat her is by turning around and saying, "We forget you," and they just walk away. And being a fairy that she is, if everybody forgets her, she just blows away in a puff of smoke. Which was how the heroes defeated her. But we're talking about trying desperately not to just turn around and forget something from our cultural past, or our personal past. And it sounds like with your story of trying to remember the smell of your grandmother's door and spending a lot of time going back and thinking about that, it sounds like personally it can be quite meditative, I would imagine, to spend that amount of time going back into your memories, and spending some time meditating on those. And I don't know, that feels very interesting. On the cultural side of it, you mentioned, words that we've borrowed that we still use today, like tomato and avocado. And was guacamole in there,
that's a derivative of that.
Right. But it's one of the things that I do love about the English language is that it has proved over the years very, very good at bringing in, adopting other words and phrases from elsewhere. And what that does is, in some way, it does create just a small capsule of memory for
Hmm.
anybody who is willing to go in and dig into the origin of the word tomato.
Hmm.
And it can send you into a rabbit hole of cultural memory.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, as a Mexican American, bilingual, what's your writing approach, and do you enjoy writing in English versus Spanish or vice versa? I ask in part because I remember reading a quote from the Argentinian writer Borges, Jorge Luis Borges,
Yeah.
who said he just loved writing in English because you can do weird stuff with it that you can't do in other languages. How is the process? How is the process for you writing when it comes to English versus Spanish? How do you do it?
Well, first of all, I'm Mexican. I'm not a Mexican American. I was
Oh,
born
okay.
in Mexico. I grew up in Mexico, and I still have my Mexican nationality, even though I have a green card to live here. And, I don't know why I haven't gone. My passport is not political at all. It's just I just
Right.
never done it. My children are American, Mexican American, kind of, and I, you know, I won a school. This is everything that I do has been a product of of a reaction to things that happened to me. So nothing has been me saying, "Oh, I'm going to write in English because blah blah blah." So I grew up with, you know, with a desire to get out of Mexico to try to, because the world was big, the world that I saw in my mother's friends and the artists that would come and the National Geographic magazines that she had. And I grew up with that kind of voracity of learning outside of my circumstance. And I was lucky that I won a scholarship to study painting and sculpture in St. Martin's in London. I was a little bit of as a kid, I was a little bit of an Anglophile because of David Bowie and Francis Bacon and William Blake and, a few very eccentric British artists that I kind of felt passionate about. Also the Goths and kind of England in that eccentric side. Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush was one of my biggest heroes. Now
Mm.
she became kind of famous from Stranger Things, but I've been collecting her records since I was a kid in Mexico, and so I wanted to explore that world and learn. And I won a scholarship, and it was like winning the lottery. So obviously, living many years in England, my English started to get a little bit better. And then I came to the States as an artist, and I did a few shows. My family, they've always been in the writing business, but at first I was more of a visual artist, and visual art is much more my comfort zone. The writing side, I had to kind of, as I said, it's a product of a reaction to circumstance. And so in my first book, I was I just survived a horrible thing. My wife and myself lost a house, our apartment in New York under a fire, very mysterious circumstances, rent control. I don't want to get into it, but you can imagine what happened. But we from one day to another, we had a 6-month-old baby, and a dog, and our house just went into a fire, and we lost everything. And
Mm.
and my house was a very long apartment that had my studio and my house. So I was painting, like really getting back into art, and was very excited for a show that I wanted to do for a gallery. And then and the fire kind of like gave me PTSD, and it took me a minute to get back in track of and of even to go back into art. It took me really some decent amount of time, but during that time I wanted to do something, so I started to do this graphic novel. But the word, the bubble started to get longer and longer and bigger, and the drawing started to get small because I was working in cafes and at photocopy machine company businesses and all over the city. And I was very discombobulated, and I was trying to process what happened. when you lose a house, I was a little distracted. And between that and being a new dad, it was kind of like overwhelming. So one day, a publisher friend of a family saw the work, and he said, "Listen, turn this into a novel. I'll pay you much more than for a graphic novel. This is great." And this is years ago. This is 2006. And I was, so by 2007, I said, yeah, I'll need the money. So I got, they paid me really well to just write it. So it was like my first novel was a product of not having a house and running around. And I did some illustrations in the novel. That's Ghost Radio, the book. And that was my first novel. And then for a lot of different reasons, I worked with a very famous writer for a while, and kind of like it's been not that I chose to work in English, even though I agree with Borges. It's a wonderful kind of sculptural language. You can really, I've invented words that I put in my books that they don't catch me. I've invented quotes from famous people that, I just invented. I keep inventing like quotes from Genghis Khan, and people reproduce my quotes. And like he didn't leave any writing, but I've been using it for years, like different things that I feel he said, because I'm a history nut, and I feel he
he could have said that.
He could have said that, but I literally quote him and put his date, and people have reproduced it in papers and stuff, and they use me as a verified quote on Genghis Khan, which is incredible. And so English is like a sculpture to me. And I do need a lot of help. I mean, I have incredible editors at Nightfire, and my first publisher was Morrow. I also just did another book that just came out called, that is part of a trilogy of espionage books with a totally different, with Simon Schuster, and and I did it with a pseudonym because the book, it's a British spy novel, and I co-wrote it with a British writer. So we decided to come up with a new personality that is the mixture of both of us. And he's a wonderful, I didn't have the skills of old English, but I had the idea and the characters. And so my books are like a sculpture. I really like process information in a very particular way. And it's become the language that I use to write. Being married to an American, obviously, like, helps, I guess, but I've been very comfortable on it, and without saying that it's not hard, because I'm dyslexic, and it's a struggle for me to write, but I love the challenge, but it's a big struggle. So
I can imagine.
To me, it's a different quality. I mean, Jorge Luis Borges is also one of my favorite writers. He's a proper, kind of classic master of the language. I'm a raconteur. I'm like, I want to tell propelling stories that are visual, and I love books because it's a tiny kingdom that you do with your publishers, and you don't need like the whole apparatus of Hollywood. It's more like a painting. So, and after a while, you have these objects that are beautiful that go in shelves or go in desks or go all around their houses. And I love that, to me, I see it like a thing that is alive, and that's why I still collect books, and I buy, every time I meet a writer, I buy their books, whether I like them or not. And I just love the physicality of it, the paper, the smells of them. It's a very tactile way of digesting a story and getting into that story. And it allows me to go into places that are there, and they exist, and they have their own little memories and stuff. So it's not it wasn't by choice. It was by accident. A lot of my work in all of the things that I do is a layered process of accident. Even in the TV shows, I'm doing a TV show now for Netflix that will come later this year called The Chosen One, and my brother and I created that show together in a crazy beautiful place. And it has and also it was like the accident of themes that it's based on a graphic novel, but then from the graphic novel we started to riff and bring in ideas of with our mother, ideas, very personal ideas that we kind of used it. It's a Mark Millar great graphic novel, but called American Jesus. But we used it as a platform to inject a lot of our personal journeys and feelings. And it's the same that I did in Piñata in the novel. So all of the process that I do, I really see a connection, and they're not as different as people might assume they are.
And I want to get to your screen work in a moment, but I do have another one more question, maybe just one more. We'll see about your books.
No,
Hold up that cover again. Hold up Piñata again. So for those watching on YouTube, you can see this, and for those listening on the podcast, just go look it up. You know, go to leopoldogout.net or go to Amazon, look up Piñata. It is a remarkable cover. It's very evocative. But there's something, as I was looking through your website, there's another book that you have on there called Monarca, about a girl who turns into a butterfly, etc. And it got me to thinking, here are these books that you're advertising on your website, and both of them are either directly or indirectly dealing with butterflies, moths. There's this imagery. What is it that draws you to that? Why the fascination with moths and butterflies?
It's a great question. So there's two components to this, because Monarca was a book that I did, during COVID, and I illustrated all of the, more than 100 images, and I co-wrote it with a friend of mine called Eva Arigis. But it's like, it was a beautiful fable that, I had this idea since I took my daughter when she was 4 or 5 to Mexico, and we went to a very near in Michoacan where the butterflies are, and a lot of butterflies kept like landing on her head, and I put it on a drawer, and one day there's been a lot of changes in this particular sanctuary where millions of butterflies go from the north from Canada all the way to Mexico. This is more than 6,000 miles, and this is a very delicate creature that no creature with an atomic mass travels so far. So it's like the most delicate creature has these extraordinary journeys that is in reverse of most migration. And I started to study them, and thanks to Eva, which later on we discovered that her dad was very involved in turning that sanctuary into a protected by UNESCO, World Heritage, land,
like a UNESCO site.
Yeah. And it gave me chills because I didn't know, when I approached Eva, I just knew that she was a, animal rights activist and a filmmaker, and I wanted to work with her for a long time. And she has a daughter, and I had a daughter, and she knows a lot more of ecology and conservation. So I wanted that, access that. And I just said, why can't we write a book together? And we did that. I have pure freedom with books. It's like jazz. I don't care of the rules of how other people make them. This is just my way. And we worked together, and I showed her my story, and then together we kind of took it to the next level. And but it was all positive. Like, the world was really on fire and dark, and we wanted to do it like a sunrise, sunrise. But then I always had this image of Piñata, and when it was a time that the Piñata is kind of like the dark sister of Monarca, and because I wanted to do this horror thing, and I was immersed in the butterflies and all of the mythologies, and there are some really terrifying goddesses that use the shape of the monarch or moths into their existence. Now, also, what's extraordinary is that this creature is the only creature that actually has two. I don't know if it's the only, but it's one of the only creatures that has 2 DNA strands in the same animal. So when it's a larva, it's one DNA strand, and when it's a butterfly, it's a different DNA. So it's.
I didn't know that. Is that all butterflies or monarchs specifically?
Yeah. No, all butterflies have 2 DNA strands, and which is crazy. And it's amazing and magical. And it's like scientists think that it's because there were 2 animals that kind of joined forces through evolution, and they still maintain those things. And there's I mean, I could spend hours talking about why and how the indigenous people, you know, related to them, and how they saw them as spirits, and how, you know, they come all the way to Mexico, the monarchs, in during the Day of the Dead. So, you know, like it's kind of the same season when they go to the south to rest and to get and to make out, basically. So you go to this forest and there's millions of those, and there's these creatures, they're all making out, and it's and they're taking the sound. So this it's a million creatures having you know, making love. So it's extraordinary, it's powerful, and it's something I wanted to draw from that magic. And then when I started doing piñata, serendipitously, you know, I wanted to explore this rage of the gods that been destroyed and forgotten. And I wanted to, so I started to go deep into some of the research that I've done with Aztec mythology, and because monarchs go through the center of Mexico, through the Aztec and the Purépechua territories, and then they land in Michoacán, which is Purépechua, but it's that same Nahuatl kind of DNA. The Nahuatl is the kind of the, not the culture, but the you know, societal strain, the Nahuatl of the center of Mexico, and there's a lot of different cultures, you know, but I chose that one because that's where I grew up, that's where the butterflies pass through, and I discovered that one of the most terrifying goddesses are this Tzitzimine that I used as a boogeyman in our book, The Horror, and they sometimes they're represented by, you know, deities with like human and butterfly and skeletal shapes, and you know, these people had this crazy imagination that you know, I can't stop saying, like, there's nothing more terrifying than a lot of the things that I've experienced in Aztec art, and I draw a lot of energy from that. So I love those layers of information, and it was very natural. I didn't plan to have two books with butterflies. It just happened naturally during the process, and I kind of worked really back to back on the two books. So you know, that's why there's a connection.
Yeah, it's and I'm if I take anything from this conversation, well, I should say, if I take one thing, if I take any one thing, it'll be, you know, I've always thought of moths and butterflies as, you know, they represent change. Anybody who's seen Silence of the Lambs, you know, it represents change, right? But I am really digging this idea of the two DNA strands, and the idea of two creatures occupying one body, and
Yeah.
kind of symbiotically working together to you know, to effectuate
And
that
also
change.
they have the memory. They're born with this memory to go 6,000 miles to
Right,
this one
right.
forest. They are also, almost every culture I've asked those, they all have the same feeling. Like people say, "Oh, I feel butterflies in my stomach," you know,
Yeah.
when they are in love. And at the same time, a lot of cultures use the butterfly to carry the souls to the land of the dead. So
Hmm.
there's so many things that are extraordinary about these creatures. They're super pollinators, you know, almost a bigger pollinator than bees. There are a
Right.
lot of the butterflies, and it's for being this delicate creature that can cause a storm around the world. In also in many cultures, there's the saying, the quote of that, but they still achieve so much even though they're so delicate. So I'm fascinated by that, of the you know, there's a painting, for example, of that haunted me since my art school, that is of Gainsborough, the British art painter in the 17th century, and there's a, or 18th century, I can't remember right now. I'm dyslexic, so forgive me for badly quoting his time, but he painted this gorgeous painting of these of two sisters running and chasing a butterfly, and it's a weird composition. It's a painting he did for himself that is in the National Gallery in London, and but you can look for it online, and the butterflies is way on the corner of the left hand side of the painting, and one of the daughters have a net, and the two daughters are, you know, 12 turning 13. So kind of like exactly like my daughter when I was writing Piñata, and you feel, and also Monarca, it was like in that point where you know that when they catch the thing, there'll be women and everything will change, or the whole world will go dark. And it's a very odd composition of the anxiety of a dad understanding that your daughter has that fleeting moment where everything will change, and it's wonderful and terrifying as well. And so I was, this image has been in my head for a long time, and I think that's one of the reasons it filtered into the two books.
Perfect. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit, and we've been very philosophical, which is my comfort zone. I love this stuff. I could talk about this for hours, but I did say I want to talk about your screen work as well. You're a documentary film director. You're a producer of stuff that's fiction and nonfiction. You do a lot of stuff on screen. Let me ask you the forbidden question, the question nobody is supposed to ask.
Mm-hmm.
What does a producer do? Now, here's why I ask, because as regular viewers of, whatever programs, a Netflix program or a movie that you go see, or a documentary that gets made, you see the actors, obviously, you know what they're doing. The director, we have an idea of what they're doing, but then we see producers and executive producers. Can you, and you've done a lot of that work. You've been a producer and an executive producer. What do those terms mean? Can you spell that out for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, it changes from person to person. Everybody's different, in this medium. Some people just find the money and they're a producer. Some people, my work is exactly as I described at the beginning of this podcast. Like what I do is I find stories. Sometimes I write them, but sometimes I can't. One of my big successes was Molly's Game, a movie I did with Aaron Sorkin, Idris Elba, and Jessica Chastain. And before the movie, I helped Molly, the real Molly Bloom, who was, doing an illegal poker game in New York. I met her in a party and we just became friends. And she was running this exotic, super high-end poker club with very beautiful women surrounding all these degenerate men and actors and filmmakers and government people and multi-billionaires. And I hate poker, by the way, and I hate celebrity things like that. But I love that she was super smart and she was like a woman in a man's world. So I was interested, and I remember telling her, Molly, we should do a book and then a TV show or a movie or something. And we had a huge fight that she wouldn't talk to me in 6 months. And then one day she came back, and like in the movie, she was beaten up by the mob. The FBI raided her house. So she called me and said, like, I think you're right. I think I have to do a book, but I don't want to tell more names than they have been leaked by the press. I'm not giving away my blacklist. So instead of making $1 million for the book, she made like 30 grand. And I was there throughout the process, and she was really genuinely, so she's one of the coolest people I've ever worked with. So we did the book, and the book got rave reviews and, an excerpt on Vanity Fair. And then it took us a while. A lot of people were interested, but also a lot of very powerful people in Hollywood wanted to destroy the film. And because they were afraid that she was going to reveal them. And we tried to do a TV show with a very famous showrunner, and then that didn't work out. And then another famous showrunner, I'm not going to name names, but she started to negotiate on our behalf with ABC, and they made us a big offer, but they wanted to cut me out from the process. And Molly was very loyal to me. And then through my lawyer at the time, a wonderful guy called Ken Hertz, he literally was neighbors or something with Aaron Sorkin. And I said, we just need 5 minutes. And he accommodated that. And he hated, by the way, he screamed at me saying, Leopoldo, you're always asking, like, this is not the way Hollywood work. And I was like, I don't care. I'm not Hollywood. I'm an artist, and I'm trying to do this story. And he opened the door. And then once we had Sorkin secure that he wanted to do this as a film and write the script, then I went to Hollywood with I started to operate, and I landed with a wonderful financing producer. And then we developed the movie. But I was from the inception of the book all the way to the post-production. So in that case, I was involved, and but at some point, this mega producer came in, and his people kind of pushed me aside, and that was okay. It was all about Molly, and my credit is there, and I know what I did for that film. And everybody, and Aaron Sorkin wrote a beautiful letter to me about how he saw me, and he, like, it's a short letter, but it's like a diploma. I have it in my, I put it up in the wall, and then Molly and I are still really good friends, and she openly says, like, to everyone she meets, that the guy who made her film was me. So it just depends on the circumstance. But other films like Days of Grace, my first movie, I co-wrote my brother, and I was much more physically involved in every step of the way. And other documentaries I've done, I've been on the camera, I've been on every single style you can imagine. But I'm the wrong person to ask what a producer is, because how I do it.
Yeah.
But to answer to people, mostly how I do it is, I have an idea, or I find an idea, or I meet someone, and then I work. I'm like a dog with a bone until something happens. And I've been very fortunate to do a lot of different movies and TV shows across the last 20 years. I basically have done, one or two a year, and it's all been through being doggedly, and all of them take, nothing gets done fast, and it's all, and for every one that I've made, 15 I've been said no to, like, the same with, The Filthy Rich, which is a big documentary that I didn't direct, but I produced at Netflix. And that project, we started investigating, doing this thing when Epstein was free. And so he was very threatening us. And we went to 19 companies with an Oscar-nominated director. Everybody wanted in the room. And then probably Epstein would call the network's bosses, and they would call us and say, no, our legal team thinks that we can't do it. So obviously he was blocking us. 19 companies, including Netflix, said no to me. And then my cousin, like, I grew up with this guy who now no longer works at Netflix, but he started to run Netflix Europe. And I called him and I said, look, the Americans do it all the time. I need nepotism. I need to do this documentary because my partner is freaking out, and it's a big story. So he bought it against the sayings of Netflix, and it went enormously successful. When he bought it, he told me, you need to bring in a mega director. So I went back to friends that had already turned me down, which was Joe Berlinger and Rico Media, and I begged them to look at it again. But now I had a buyer. So then Joe Berlinger decided, I want to do it because he's a buddy of mine, and he's an Oscar-nominated director, and he's been amazing. And he decided to bring his whole team there. But I had already the story and a book, a best-selling book, and and Netflix had already agreed to buy it on the condition that I would find somebody like Joe. And it was a very successful project, but there were a bunch of producers, because I can't do everything. I'm not good at that. So we had a producer that was in charge of, like, making sure that every woman that was interviewed there, it has the right tone. We brought in a co-director for Joe. He didn't even ended up directing. It was directed by Lisa Bryant, who is, because Netflix and us decided, like, it's so horrible what happened to these women, that they wanted to bring a women director to be able to interview with a different perspective all of the survivors of his stuff. They're not victims; they were survivors of this stuff. And we need a producer to access to those people and convince them to work with us. So every producer has a different relationship with a project, and you shouldn't, like, for the people I listen to it, when people roll their eyes, I always tell them, like, you never know, maybe that person. I've given credit to producers that all they did is give me the access to someone, and they earned it. I don't care. I have no greed of it's the movie business is done by a big collective of people, and that's why my ego stays in my paintings and with my kids, and that's a little world that I do on my own. But producers are the mechanics of getting a movie done, the sculptors of getting a movie done. Sometimes I love to work with my younger brother, who's a big director now, and it's a very big passage of I don't consider myself a normal producer. I'm like more like a cook in a line of a kitchen, and I'm trying to bring the ingredients. It just happens that the thing that I'm really good at is finding the original ingredients and putting them together. But that doesn't mean that I don't affect the project all the way until the end. But it's part of the change of reaction. Because to make those movies, like everybody that says, "Oh yeah, I made this movie on my own," that's not true. Like movies are made by little
Right.
armies. It's just that, you know, in America was the whole mythology of the single, you know, Jackson Pollock artist, you know, working against the winds and making a movie. But you know, I can go through every movie ever made, and you'll see that, you know, Alfred Hitchcock he said, written by Alfred Hitchcock. I read his biography. There's 18 people that used to work for him and his wife, and the wife was the one who was typing the entire process of his movies that were written by him. So there, you know, everybody had a different process, and that's what a producer do, is find the process. Now there's very effective producers that are very Hollywood, that are wonderful, that from start to finish they know how to, you know, book a movie in the traditional way and find a writer and develop it, you know. And I know some of them, and they're my masters, like, you know, William Horberg. There's great producers that are the real deal, that you know that they've been involved in every step of the way. My brother, who's a director, he's a phenomenal producer as well. So it's something that you should never first roll your eyes. You should, like, it's more exciting to just, you know, so what do you do? What did you do in that movie? How was your relationship? How was your involvement? And some people didn't do much, but what they did caused a domino effect to get a movie made. So do they have the right to be a producer or not? That's a big conversation, and it's a wonderful conversation. But I love the process, and I love everybody that is involved, and everybody that really helped and worked on the project has the right to dance in the happy moments.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you know, producer could be any number of things, but your style of it fits very well with how you were talking about your books and your art, which is when you were comparing yourself, what you do versus what Jorge Luis Borges did. You said, "I'm a raconteur," and that seems to fit really well. You're a storyteller. You want to shepherd a story from inception to release.
Yeah.
And this is one more way of doing that. Well,
Yeah.
Leopoldo, I appreciate you taking this hour to chat with me about all this stuff. It's been a fascinating conversation. The book is Piñata. Hold that up for me one more time. We've got Piñata, so people can go check that out. It's a kind of Mexican horror book that takes place, it sounds like, in large part in New York City, but with a lot of Mexican folklore that comes in. And I'm looking forward to my copy. I know it's on its way to me, so I'm looking.
But you can
forward
do
to
it
mine.
as well, man. I always tell this to everyone that I talk to, that when they say, "Oh my God, my career, this and that," you're also a great storyteller. You ask some of the best questions that I've had asked, and you notice things on my work that is very meaningful. And I always tell, you know, people, it's like the best way is to let the universe happen and work itself through you. Like, there is a lot of ideas that you were talking to me about today in today's conversation, that for you it's like your whiteboard. So I always tell people, look, when you're a little stuck, when you don't know how to do more things than what you're doing, like, everybody has a different style to break that fear. But I feel that you have a wonderful, you know, like a detective. You really came to the boiling points of the structure of what I do. So do the same for you. Like, put a big whiteboard and start putting your rabbit holes. And it doesn't matter, but I always tell people, start small. Like, start a rabbit hole not by what is the meaning of the universe, but started by an atomic thing. It's like the actual weight of, you know, there's a place in England that has the sculptures of the real weight of a kilogram and a meter, and who made that, and how do they made them, and why that weight, and like, you can start very atomically on ideas, and they always take you to wonderful journeys, and then you meet people randomly that you have to just be open to that. And it's what I love about being in this country is that it has so many opportunity, because right now I'm in the middle of production of a podcast. It's my first podcast. I know everybody's doing podcasts, but in this podcast, I'm working with it's a memoir based on a book I helped publish, and called, the book is called Pesos, and by Pietro La Greca. And the podcast, we're doing an experiment. It's not the audiobook. It's the audiobook happened, and we're also doing a podcast. In the podcast, we're hiring over 50 actors. It'll be an experience. I have no clue if it's going to be good, but we're doing something totally different. Most podcasts has 4 or 5 people. We're doing a total kind of cinema del arte craziness and experiential. Luis Abu is a family member who's actually directing that piece. But it was, I heard that idea a few years ago, and I said, this is going to be a great book and a great podcast. And I'm putting together this for a few years now, and now it's actually happening. And Audible gave us all the tools to financial and legal to go and do it. And it's going to be difficult, because it's like managing all of these stories and making them flow is difficult. But it's the same than in Piñata. And in Piñata, there's 500 years of history that I had to converge into a modern genre horror story of a mom and 2 daughters. And how do you converge that in a flowy, deep dive, but cool way,
Like finding the history of the word tomato. You can find all the facts and create your bullet list of what the facts are, but then how do you tell a story?
Exactly.
The story of the word tomato would would actually probably be a really good book.
I think you should do that. It's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. I think you should do that. And I think that it should be a scratch and smell book.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, I personally love tomatoes. I eat them like apples.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And I think I just lost a bunch of listeners by admitting that. So
really, no,
people don't like tomatoes, Leopoldo. I don't know what it is, but people don't like tomatoes.
Well, we have to convert them. They haven't had a good one. Like, you go to Italy and or Mexico, and you find a good farm that they have really good ones, and it's like, you can eat them like apples, I promise you.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. The book is Piñata. Any other projects you want to point people toward? Anything coming up?
Well, Piñata is what I want people to hear. And then go to my Instagram, which is Leopoldo. I put a lot of my art there. I love people, and I want everybody to be happy and experience this, ride. And then through my Instagram or my website, I think they can discover other things that I'm doing. But I want to keep it very focused on this goal on this, beautiful interview because I put my heart and soul on this book, and my blood is there. And there's so many things. I mean, we could talk for 5 hours on the book, but I know that your listeners probably have other things to do.
Well, they can go check it out at leopoldogout.com. That's .net, G-O-U-T. And honestly, don't worry about spelling it, because I'm going to put the link in the show notes so people can go check that out. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your podcast catcher, just look for the link in the show notes, and you can check that out there. While you're there, don't forget to visit thelegendarium.com, where you can check out past episodes sorted by author, by subject. You can also find a link to our Discord server, where we have thousands of other reading nuts just like you who want to talk about books, and they're very friendly about it. So go check that out. And lastly, our Patreon link. If you appreciate what we do on this show and you want to support us, please go there to thelegendarium.com, and you'll find all of those links. All right, Leopoldo, once again, thank you so much.
One thing, what a good name. The Legendarium is fantastic. And the logo, whoever made that logo, I'm envious. I love the logo, and I love you should do t-shirts. I would buy a t-shirt.
I will send you a t-shirt. I'll talk to you about that.
It's I love it.
I am not a designer. I've had horrific success or lack thereof with design in the past, but that logo is the one thing I ever did that worked.
It's beautiful.
So
it feels like medieval's the history, I really like it.
I appreciate it. Well, thanks for the kind words, and thanks everybody for listening. I will see you next time.